Good day, everybody. My name is Lorianne LaRocco, and I'm the Senior Editor of Guests at CNBC. And welcome to our high-level meeting today, looking at digitalization and the need for it in this pandemic world and in the world where every consumer around the world is just opening their wallet and can't control their spending. I like to say that the flow of trade is a series of pipes, and trade needs to flow regardless. I always say on TV, a vessel at rest is not making money. Containers at rest are not making money. Lockdowns in China, as we have seen, have created elbows in the plumbing in which our flow trades around the world. And in some cases, with the lockdowns, not only have elbows been created, but stoppers in that plumbing as well. During this time, the global consumer has opened their wallets, producing tremendous demand. The combination of these lockdowns and demand has created the contagion of congestion we are facing today, and it is spreading. The discussion for the need of blockchain in the world of logistics has since become louder with this pandemic. The more tools we have to anticipate and plan on logistics in the world of trade, the better. Unfortunately, though, the world of logistics is not on equal digital footing. Today, I am joined with a group of distinguished individuals to discuss these challenges. Joining us this morning are Mona Haddad, Global Director for Trade for the World Bank; Adrian Suarez, Commissioner of Customs and Excise for the Zimbabwe Revenue Authority; Nazari bin Yahya, Head of Johor Port Skills Center; Stephen Pope, Group Head of Trade Facilitation for the Deutsche Post of DHL; and Andre Simha, MSC's Mediterranean Shipping Company and Digital Container Shipping Association. Good day, everybody. And Mona, would you be so kind to unmute and start with your presentation, please?
Thank you very much, Lori. Very happy to be here with this distinguished panel. This is a very timely discussion as we seek to revive economic growth and accelerate recovery from the pandemic, and at the same time, creating a global economy that is more resilient to shocks. At the World Bank, we have been undertaking quick business pulse surveys during the pandemic. And through these surveys, we found that firms of all sizes and industries increased their investment in digitalization as a strategy for weathering the pandemic. But we also saw a widening divide in the ability to shift toward more digital commerce, divisions between small and large firms, and divisions across countries. As you know, the digital business density varies according to types of countries. We have large economies like the BRICS that have sufficient domestic market size that allows digital startups to develop minimum viable products and reach scale before international expansion, such as India, China, and Nigeria. We have small open economies with progressive policies that compensate for their limited market size and become regional gravity hubs for digital business by adopting bold policies of technology experimentation, cross-border flows of data and talent attraction and retention, such as Estonia, Armenia, Kenya, Rwanda, and Ghana. And we have smaller, relatively closed or more closed economies in a difficult position to grow their digital ecosystem, but can consider tapping into regional hubs. The World Bank is actually working closely with client countries to improve the environment for digital investment overall and allow more countries to seize digital opportunities. For that, we look at several elements: good regulatory practices that enable e-commerce. We look at whether the regulatory framework promotes a safe and trusted environment for e-commerce by providing legal protection to e-commerce users and service providers, legal requirements to promote electronic commerce transactions and cybersecurity requirements, regulatory restrictions on e-commerce, looking at the framework which establishes whether the framework establishes restrictive or discriminatory measures, such as bans on online sales and cross-border data flows. We also assess the need for regulations that reduce risks of market dominance and anti-competitive behaviors of big tech companies so that more firms can join the network to provide services. We look at time and cost to engage in e-commerce, how long does it take, and how costly it is to obtain, register, and protect domain names, and so on. And then, of course, the topic of today, the e-commerce logistics, looking at cash on delivery, return logistics, portable payment terminals, extension of logistics networks, and cost-effective consolidation of panels. Let me give an example and illustrate the importance of e-commerce for the topic of today. We have done a recent study at the World Bank on e-commerce in Albania, and it shows that e-commerce is growing in the country. 18% of Albanian firms have started or increased online business activity during the pandemic. But Albania still lags behind its peers along key dimensions of digital trade. For example, only 38% of Albanian consumers are estimated to use e-commerce as of 2022, which is far below its regional peers, such as Croatia, at 62%. Why is this? Our work has identified key constraints in a number of areas: digital connectivity, online payments, taxation, as well as the regulatory environment. One other important constraint was logistics and customs. And since we prepared that diagnostic in 2020, Albania started to look at this and take actions by, for example, legislating the regular publication of tariffs by all logistics providers to increase competition and lower the cost of cross-border parcel delivery. Also, it implemented a new legislation to facilitate electronic payments. And these two legislations really made quite a bit of difference. So indeed, logistics and e-commerce need to develop hand in hand. E-commerce relies on business to consumer B2C supply chains, and these supply chains involve a large number of intermediaries with overlapping roles: e-commerce platforms, logistics service providers, and parcel services. The constraints to e-commerce logistics are very specific and to a large extent different from those of large units such as containers and full truck loads that we typically deal with either as international organizations. We have been doing analysis on these big trade facilitation issues, but this is different. It is more about optimization of the distribution and collection of small units and generating economies of scale to distribute. So cross-border e-commerce is even more constrained by the lack of economies of scale and potentially by trade facilitation issues. From our work on logistics for e-commerce, for example, in the Middle East and North Africa, we identified the typical constraints for logistics for e-commerce in developing countries. In Egypt, for example, which has a very difficult logistics environment, e-commerce platforms must invest in their own logistics for lack of alternatives. And we also saw that global express networks do not play a major role in developing countries. And the reason is often a lack of local distribution networks, and they focus on express delivery rather than on parcels. Also, the return logistics are challenging and slow down e-commerce. So the main policy issues around logistics for e-commerce, as we see them, really include things like setting up digital logistics platforms that could solve many of the problems around distribution for e-commerce, but they often operate in a regulatory gray zone. An impediment to efficient distribution is the monopoly for parcel delivery by many postal services. And there is high degree of informality in the logistics services, including informal employment. So this is what we are encountering in developing countries. Now to quickly turn to global monitoring. Having reliable cross-country data is really crucial for policymakers and business actors to benchmark a country's performance. And the World Bank is currently preparing 3 tools that are relevant for logistics and e-commerce. The first tool is the Logistics Performance Index, or LPI, which we have been publishing for several years, and the next edition is coming this fall. The new revision uses a revised methodology based on actual supply chain performance data, in addition to perception-based data from a survey. And it will incorporate tracking data from different logistics types, such as air cargo and container shipping. And there will be a heavier focus on the concept of supply chain connectivity, which is even more important in our interconnected world. Another tool with regards to global monitoring by the World Bank is the new business enabling environment, which is under preparation. And it assesses the business and investment climate in economies, looking at e-commerce, among other things. 3 aspects for that: good regulatory practices enabling e-commerce, regulatory restrictions on e-commerce, and time and cost to engage in e-commerce. And beyond the logistics part, we are also doing a broader ecosystem, a broader assessment of ecosystem for e-commerce, including regulatory framework for economic platforms. So the third tool really that we are developing is the Digital Trade Regulatory Readiness Database, which captures information for really 100 countries. So to sum up, in terms of the role of global monitoring, after the digital acceleration, which was caused by COVID-19, the firm's competitiveness really depends today on whether the regulatory framework can adapt to the evolving context and establish a transparent, predictable, and safe environment for the potential of trade, including e-trade, to be harnessed. And the COVID-19 pandemic has affected supply chains across the world. And our work on the supply chain disruptions confirms that e-commerce is not just the small parcels that we see arriving at our letterbox, although it is always a nice surprise. The surge in e-commerce during the pandemic has led to high sea freight rates. This is driving up consumer price levels, and given the sustained increase in container freight rates, consumer prices in lower income countries are expected now to rise by 2.2% this year. The e-logistics are also linked to the bigger logistics problems. And our task is to help countries navigate this new landscape so that they can continue to use trade as a growth enabler. Thank you very much, Lori.
Thank you so much, Mona. Thank you. Let's go to Adrian Suarez. And just a friendly reminder to everybody, if we can kind of stick to the 5 minutes, that would be fantastic, so we can get to all of these great topics. Adrian?
Thank you very much. I will share my screen and try to quickly go through it. I just want to take us briefly through what the Zimbabwe Revenue Authority, or how the Zimbabwe Revenue Authority has leveraged on digitalization and data management in order to improve its operations. This is a brief outline of how my presentation is structured. I'll briefly talk about our vision. Our vision talks about being a beacon of excellence. And in order for us as an administration to be a beacon of excellence, we need to then implement best practices in the customs arena as well as leveraging on technologies, including automation and ICTs. What I've then highlighted there is briefly the functions of a custom and excise division, which is collection of revenue, facilitation of trade, protection of society, and of course, being an advisor to government. Now, just to give a context of Zimbabwe, we've got 16 inland offices, 17 border posts, and 4 international airports. These are spread in regions. We have 6 regions, which is depicted in that map over there with the different colors, just so that we get to understand how geographically widespread we are. Now, in order to react to the needs that are required of a revenue authority, what I'm displaying there is our strategic plan, which is one pager for ease of convenience. And we'll find that it does feed into the Zimbabwe Vision 2030, which is looking at being a prosperous and empowered middle-class income society by 2030. And there are 3 key pillars which look at ease of doing business, consolidation of macroeconomic stability, and of course, strengthening revenue collection. Now, how does the Revenue Authority contribute into that? It contributes directly through those 4 results, which the authority is expected to achieve, which is strengthening institutional image, maximizing revenue collection, increasing voluntary compliance, and of course, and most importantly, enhancing trade facilitation and the protection of society. And now the enablers that are going to allow us to achieve this are the 12 below that. But most importantly for this particular discussion, we are looking at embracing digital transformation, which is basically the area we are focusing on today. Now, just to give a brief on the ICT journey or the automation journey of the authority, we did initially automate, moving from a manual environment to an automated environment for commercial clearances in 1991, when we implemented a SCUDA, and we were the first in the region to implement a SCUDA. And as you can see, we progressed through the various stages of a SCUDA platforms until we implemented the SCUDA World platform, which is the current platform that we are running on. And in a bid to improve our service delivery and ensure that we contribute towards movement within the supply chain, various features and functionalities were developed. I'll not go through all of them, but those are some of the functionalities that we have we implemented as time went on. Of particular interest, probably I can discuss, is the issue of the e-payment functionality. This is where we provided convenience to our clients to make payments through e-banking facilities. We have direct linkages with our banks or with our financial institutions within the country. And this actually assisted us in our bid to transition into the COVID-19 period. Now, we also undertook quite a bit of systems integration, where we integrated our SCUDA World with various systems. Of course, we've got SAP, which is our enterprise resource management system, through which we do our financial reporting. We've also integrated with our central vehicle registration system, which is responsible for the licensing and registration of motor vehicles on importation. Of course, our local banking systems. I've spoken about our e-banking platform. We also have integrations with our central bank so that we can assist them in the implementation of monetary policy. We also have integration with our local motor vehicle insurance systems so that on importation of motor vehicles, they are in a position to get the insurance cover through our ZIMRA systems. And of course, we have an electronic cargo tracking system that is interfaced with our SCUDA World system, which assists us in our compliance efforts. And we are also looking at the integration with some of our neighboring revenue administrations, particularly Zambia and South Africa. Some of the automation initiatives which are currently under development, which are not only meant to assist us in improving our service delivery, but also in ensuring that we contribute towards securing the supply chain as well as enhancing the use of e-commerce. We've got our single window environment that's currently under development. The first phase is involving 9 border stakeholders. This is a 3-year project, which is expected to be completed by end of 2023. And the first stage of implementation is expected in a few months' time, by end of June 2022, when our system will be up and running. And of course, this system will also provide us with an opportunity to develop a trade portal for ease of access of information from our various stakeholders. We also are developing a customs offences module. We are also developing a traffic management and queue management systems, which will be integrated into our Scooter World system. And we are automating some of our identified manual processes. Some of these include such things like our private travelers clearance modules. And we are hopeful that we will be in a position to upgrade our scooter system this year to the latest version. And these, like I said, are all in effort to ensure that we do keep abreast with the e-commerce interventions or developments that are occurring. Now we look at what are the benefits. I've tried to separate these into 3 broad groups. I'll not go through all of them. I'll just touch on specific issues. We've got government, we've got transporters and clearing agents, and of course, we've got our traders. Now, the previous speaker made mention of trade data. So part of the efforts is to ensure that we do have readily available trade data, which will be in a harmonized format, since all agencies will be utilizing these automated platforms. We are also looking at enhancing trade facilitation, reduction of border delays for government. And of course, we're looking at improving revenue collections and accountability, as well as contributing to the economic growth of the country. Now, what does the private sector get out of it? We've got our transporters and clearing agents who would have faster movement of goods as they pass through our ports of entry. They will be able to productively allocate their resources. Here we're looking at personnel and other resources. They will also have reliable information on goods clearances. And of course, one of the big issues would be the predictability and harmonization of clearance requirements. So automation is bringing all these good things for transporters and clearing agents. And we are certain that these benefits will assist in their endeavors to work in the movement of goods as well. Now, traders—
Mr. Suarez, I'm sorry to interrupt. Unfortunately, we cannot see your presentation. I think you unfortunately unshared it at one point. My apologies in interrupting. I did see the presentation. Your offer sent it to me and it was wonderful. Here you go. Now we can see it.
Okay, I did share it and then I had something popping up on my screen, which I removed. I think that's what removed the presentation. So this is the slide I was on. Unfortunately, for the interest of time, I will not go back. Like I was saying, traders will benefit in the sense that we'll have a faster movement of goods resulting from reduced border delays. And of course, this will result in cost reductions in cross-border trade, which again was mentioned by the previous speaker. And they will have predictable and harmonized clearance requirements and procedures so that they can plan for importations and in the course of undertaking their business. And of course, for our traders in Zimbabwe, this will improve their export competitiveness on the global arena. Now, this is unfortunately my last slide. It appears people didn't see the previous ones, but in order to undergo such transformation, you need key enablers. And of course, the major one would be government support. We'd also, at organizational level, need to incorporate such plans within our strategic plan, as I showed you, or as I said, the strategic map does include a portion on automation or digital transformation within the authority. And you need to build strategic partnerships with technical support and donor organizations, because some of these interventions do require a lot of support. And of course, funding is required and committed and skilled staff. Now, for committed and skilled staff, I think for the Zimbabwe Revenue Authority, we are quite, we do have quite skilled and committed staff. So in that sense, that area is quite well covered. Thank you, Laurie. I think that's the end of my presentation. It's unfortunate that I didn't realize my presentation was not visible. Thank you.
Well, thank you again, Adrian. And then maybe there's a way for the participants, and not for those that are watching, if maybe like the presentation could be emailed out, because it is quite extensive, and your team worked really hard on it. So if you could do me a favor, please, and unshare the screen, that would be fabulous.
Okay.
This is why I don't share screens. I would accidentally like disconnect this entire panel if you had me in control of anything. I know my limitations.
I think I've managed.
You did, you did. Thank you so much. Well, let's now go to our next panelist, Mr. Naziri bin Yahya. Would you be so kind to present, please? If you could do me a favor and unmute yourself.
All right. Thank you very much, Laurie, for this kind introduction. And it's been great here. And thank you for UNCTAD for inviting me to talk a little bit about the port and e-commerce. I can control this. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, this is the agenda that I have today, but unfortunately, because of the 5 minutes time limit, I will stop at agenda number 2. But the full presentation has been given to UNCTAD. I think they have a platform to publish to all these participants. Okay, all right. Next. Okay, this is a big question. Everybody talks about e-commerce, and everybody knows that e-commerce is all about boxes and small parcels. But what on earth? How on earth the port is got involved in this? Okay? So initially, I wanted to talk about the big picture. The high level thing, but eventually I succumbed to the fact that I have to talk on the basic fundamentals, how the port gets involved in the e-commerce. Okay, all right, next. All right, next. Okay, next. All right, hang on, can you go back? It's too fast. Can you go back, please? All right. The port as a whole, actually the maritime business as a whole transport about 90% of the international trade. And of this international trade, you have about 11 billion metric tons of cargo being transported either by bulk or by bulk vessel or by containers. And having taken everything into consideration, when we travel the cargoes by container, we are talking about 900 million boxes that is traveling all over the world. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, I want to take this into perspective. In the world today, as of now, we have about approximately 100,000 ships across the globe. And the range between 5 to 9 years old ships, it represents the highest proportion of the fleet carrying capacity. I want to compare this against the aircrafts. Next slide, please. Okay, aircrafts, yeah, we have a lot of aircrafts. And in this example, I will take the Boeing 777 freighter as an example, as a comparison. A Boeing 777 freighter can carry approximately about 233,000 pounds, or about 100 metric tons. This 100 metric tons, okay, now we look at the perspective. One vessel can carry, one breakbulk vessel can carry about 6,000 metric tons. If you're talking about 100 metric tons to carry 6,000 metric tons, we are talking approximately about 58 777 freighter, Boeing freighter that has to carry the load in the capacity of one vessel. That's a lot. Okay, that's a lot, and that's actually confirms to what Mona, the first speaker, said just now. A lot of e-commerce today is lacking behind the economies of scale, and the economies of scale is because well, cargo has been transported by aircrafts cannot match the capacity of a vessel. Okay, next. Next slide, please. All right. Again, for the past few years, the freight rate has been shooting up beyond reasonable levels. Next slide, please. And everybody has agreed that for the past 20 years, e-commerce has grown tremendously in the size, the reach, and of course, everybody knows the biggest e-commerce country is China. Then comes India and Indonesia, just because of the population. And these two countries, India and Indonesia, has the population that has the appetite towards technology. Okay, next slide. Okay, come to think of it. I've been talking about this, but are there any e-commerce traces at the port? Next slide, please. Next slide. Okay, I'll be surprised actually if there is no e-commerce at the port, because e-commerce has been on for many years. It's just that we did not realize that. It started in the 1960s when we have the EDI. It was a big thing those days, but today EDI was nothing. Today e-commerce at the port has grown at a very huge level. Okay, next slide. I'll give you this example. A case study number one. I cannot distinguish e-commerce against digitalization, but we have to bring this together to get everybody in this perspective. F1 logistics, F1 cars, everybody knows, most of us knows about F1 cars. It's a $1 billion business. And it's just not about fast cars. It's about effective e-commerce control, effective land, sea, and continuous logistics planning, because we are talking about 22, 23 races per year. This year it becomes 22 because Russia was disqualified. When you talk about driving 10 teams, 20 drivers, 20 races, 5 continents, and across 9 months across all the continents. Next slide, please. And when they talk about this, we are talking about a humongous transportation of equipments. We are talking about 2,000 metric tons of freight. 2,000 metric tons is equivalent to 240 elephants in the perspective. And we're talking about 131,000 kilometers being transferred, flown all over the world. That's approximately 4 times an aircraft circulating around the globe. That's big. And all these cargoes are being moved and procured and purchased, or whatever they need to purchase, all year round. Okay, next slide, please. This one I have to give credit to the Post because some of the slides are from them, and this is how they do it. They blend together air, sea, and freight. They want at one go. Next slide, please. And come to be something smaller. This is wooden boat logistics. Okay. The operation to this part of the world, Malaysia, Singapore, Indonesia, and the Indonesian ports, there's been going on for many years. It started with just manual exchanges of documents, but today it cannot be that. It has to be documented and it has to be electronically processed, because if not, you get all the fresh caught fish die while waiting for the custom clearance. Okay, next slide. There's some photos there. Next slide then. All right. Again, taking everything into perspective, e-commerce is actually, a lot of us thought e-commerce is just boxes, parcels. But can you imagine that if we can put all these boxes and parcels in containers, would that reduce a lot of costs? Okay, just think about it. Next slide, please. All right. Again, there are 4 basic types of e-commerce: B2B, B2C, C2C, and C2B. And all this while, next slide, we are just being focused on the consumerism, focus on B2C and B2B. Okay? Right. Next one. This shall be my last slide to conclude the 5 minutes. And you look into all these things. For the e-commerce, it forces the demand, it boosted the demand for better logistic facilities. forces the sellers and the buyers to find cheaper transportation system. And on top of all, I didn't put it here. Next slide, please. That the exporter are getting very nervous about how to control their cargoes. Imagine that every time you Amazon.com, you buy something from Amazon.com always have the intention of how visible my cargo is. How can the customers seize the cargo, and how for Amazon.com can control this. Lastly, to conclude my 5 minutes, it's actually not 5 minutes, it actually runs more than 7 minutes. A quote by Soren School, a CEO of Maersk. He said that Amazon is a threat if we do not do a good job for them. A CEO of Maersk said this. Amazon is a threat if you do not do a good job for them. If you don't do our job well, then there is no doubt that these big strong companies like Amazon would look into whether they can do it themselves. So this is something. So I stop there. Maybe I'm open for questions. Lorianne can take it up later. Back to you, Lori.
Thank you so much. It was a wonderful presentation. And for those who are not monitoring the chat, this recording and the files of the presentation will be made available after this event. And it's just fantastic. Let's now go to Stephen Pope. Stephen, if you could please unmute and offer us your presentation.
Yeah, thank you. Good morning, Lorraine. For you, it's a very early morning. I really appreciate it. That's one of the negatives of digitalization. We forget time zones. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening to anyone, wherever you are. And thank you very much, firstly, to UNCTAD for inviting me. I'm going to cover principally the sort of digitalization that one sees within the logistics industry and within the company that I work for, Deutsche Post DHL. And naturally, thank you for the plug for DHL and for F1 Logistics. That what I then want to cover is some of the challenges that we face, but certainly a lot of the opportunities. If any of you joined yesterday, you will have heard in one of the panels the discussion around the fact that since the COVID-19 pandemic, we have moved digitally in 10 years. That's a tremendous leap. Whether it's 10 years in the future, one needs to look carefully. But we've certainly made great strides. And a perfect example is where we are today. And if you look at, even in this panel, we're scattered all over the globe, but we're all coming through to you digitally. In the world of e-commerce, and one thing I just wanted to highlight is e-commerce is just a paradigm shift in commerce. It's electronic commerce. It is a digitalized solution. And in the world of e-commerce, where solutions are being offered with various levels of sophistication according to the needs of businesses, including SMEs and MSMEs. And I'll cover that in a while. And companies like DHL are offering track and trace capacity, enabling SMEs in particular and businesses and their customers the ability to know where a shipment is at any given time, even down to optimization of delivery. You can now choose when a shipment will be delivered. And before I forget, I just want to point out to Dr. Haddad from the World Bank. You'll be glad to know Express is in all DCs and LDCs in the form of DHL. We are everywhere. And the trade facilitation department that I lead, our focus is on DCs and LDCs, and I'll cover that in a minute. Now, in terms of digitalization and what we do, Deutsche Post DHL has what we call Strategy 2025, which is about delivering excellence in a digital world. And we look at all the tools that are available, not only to optimize the experience for our customers, our logistics efficiency, but also our interaction with regulators as well at the borders. So we use things like APIs, offering machine-to-machine communication for our customers and our external stakeholders. We're looking at blockchain. We have a blockchain solution linking data systems in global value chains, including with customs. And we're currently looking at piloting with customs administrations with some international donors. And we have, of course, what we call the Internet of Things, which is connecting non-digital items such as pallets and containers with the internet using smart devices, which can even monitor sensitive goods, for example, in terms of temperature and condition. And this enables us to track them at any given time and know where all our containers are, where the goods are, etc., and what sort of state they're in at that point. So data is being used not only to track individual shipments, however, though, we're also using it to predict volumes in specific trade lanes, and which helps us better to understand and target and develop new and lucrative markets, and also manage the throughputs in the peaks and troughs as we see through the global supply chain. And as many of you will know, is since the pandemic, we used to have these massive peak periods, sort of Black Friday, you'd have Christmas period. Well, that's gone. There are obviously still peaks, but we don't have the troughs anymore. There is no quiet period anymore. It's consistent. Something that you've raised, Laurie, a lot in the articles that you've been writing about. But one thing I do want to emphasize, though, is without digitalization and e-commerce, the negative economic impact of the pandemic and the current challenges that we'd face would have been a lot worse. E-commerce has helped to mitigate that. And I think that's one of the issues that we have. And one of the things that I want to touch on as well is the inclusive nature that e-commerce has to offer, and particularly for DCs and LDCs and for SMEs. If you're a small or medium enterprise or a micro small or medium enterprise in a developed or least developed economy, your customers were the people that walked past your shop front or market stall. It was restricted. But now with e-commerce, and if you can get digital access to the internet, you have almost instant access to the global market. So if you have the right goods at the right price, you can find a customer anywhere around the world. And this is part of what we do in Go Trade. And I'll cover that briefly in a minute, about the sort of thing that we do about helping SMEs identify the opportunities that e-commerce presents, and basically how they can access the market. But of course, e-commerce presents its own challenges in terms of border processes. However, it also presents a real opportunity in terms of transparency. E-commerce, by its very nature, carries a data footprint from start to finish. The question is how we use that data to optimize not only the supply chain itself in terms of the transport and logistics, but also in the way the goods move across borders and the interaction between border agencies. So it is data rich. So it leaves that footprint. But one of the questions is how we do that. And one of the things that I want to briefly touch on, and this is what we look at, is education, is change management. Customs processes have been traditionally transactional, but now we're moving into a world where transactional might not necessarily work with what we face in e-commerce, particularly in individual shipments. And this is something that was in the UNCTAD report, that the challenges facing customs administrations. But there are a number of opportunities that they present in terms of pre-arrival processing, enabling the transmission of data in advance to customs administrations and other border agencies to enable them to prepare and decide whether a goods can be immediately cleared. This, the World Customs Organization has what they call the revised Kyoto Convention and the immediate release guidelines, and that's part of that element. Of course, it's also enshrined within the Trade Facilitation Agreement as well. If you look at the TFA, a lot of the best practice in the TFA, particularly around border processes, comes from the revised Kyoto Convention. And what we've been doing within Go Trade and Trade Facilitation is we've been working with donor countries in DCs and LDCs, working with customs administrations on the use of digitalization. And at the same time, what we've been doing is we've been training SMEs as well, identifying entrepreneurs in countries and helping them to see the potential that they have for accessing the global market and what we call creating inclusive and sustainable economic growth through trade. And so one of the things that we're doing is we have what we call the certified training program, which we're rolling out around the world, where we're teaching SMEs about the opportunities, but we teach them not only around the commercial elements, but also around compliance, what sort of border processes they're going to come up against. what sort of customs performance there are. So there's a whole suite, as you could say, in terms of training that we have. And the other thing that we focus on as well with our donor partners is on change management with border administrations as well. Moving away from a command and control approach to things and moving from paper-based systems to digital takes a change of mindset. It may well be, at the board level, at Adrian's level, that they completely get digital, but what you've got to do is you've got to also communicate that down. And I come from a customs administration myself in the UK, so I know exactly what the challenges are. I remember back in the beginning when we had similar challenges when I was covering the Port of Felixstowe many years ago. We went completely digital. It's persuading customs officers the benefits that data produces. And just quickly before we go on further, I think one of the visions that we should have is the data is there. We need to make sure that the data is used only once if possible, and all that data is available and transmitted via APIs, via blockchain, with border agencies. And I think the long-term vision and things like transit and moving cross-border is that one country's export data should be one country's import data. If you do that, you reduce costs, you increase efficiency, and above all, everyone's joined up. And I think that's something to be commended. And this is something that the WCO certainly looked at with what they call the globally connected customs. So a lot of opportunity there. We are piloting reforms with GoTrade with our donor partners around the world, and we're open to more and more. In fact, before I joined this session, I was in a meeting with the German government, fun enough, talking about the digitalized customs process programs that we have via what we call the German Alliance for Trade Facilitation. So plenty of opportunity there. This is where we are. Let's connect the dots and let's reap the benefit, particularly for SMEs in DCs and LDCs. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stephen. Let's go now to our final panelist, Mr. Andre Sema. Andre, I give you the mic.
Thank you, Lorianne, and yes, good early morning to you. Good afternoon to to everyone else. So 5 minutes. Let me try and condense this. It'll probably take 10, but I think it's been said many times today, and luckily as the last panelists, I can skip a few things. But yeah, e-commerce has skyrocketed, particularly since the start of the pandemic. We understand that due to lockdowns, travel restrictions, health concerns, more and more people are shopping from their homes. So the result is a surge in demand for shipping, port and intermodal transport services, which we mentioned, which in turn has triggered a lot of the disruptions and congestions we see in the global supply chain. And amid this uncertainty, one thing is for sure, we need more efficient digitized processes, and data sharing has never been more important, as David just mentioned. Very happy to hear from Mona Haddad of the World Bank and Adrian Suarez as well from Zimbabwe, how they're putting digital to improve e-commerce. And this is, of course, a very welcome move, particularly for us, since we are part of the supply chain, moving cargo at sea and on land. And as mentioned also by Nazir Binyar, if I'm not mistaken, e-commerce is not only about small boxes, but that's just the tip of the iceberg, because the regional hubs, of course, need to be provisioned by sea and in some cases by air to serve customers rapidly. I'm very curious actually as to which portion of our consumer e-commerce needs do we really need to receive overnight and with free shipping. So that's probably an open discussion. But overall, I think that digital collaboration is vital to the evolution of the container shipping industry, which is my domain. And I really do see huge potentials in digitizing the supply chain, building collaboration around common standards. David was very clear a few minutes ago about the need to have only one source of data, and that does require standards. So that's part of my discussion. So, I think rather than technology, which was mentioned a bit earlier on when we talked about, I think, Laura, you mentioned the blockchain, rather than tech just for the sake of tech, I think it's more interesting to see how it can improve efficiencies, reduce costs, and in the end create better services for our customers, of which we are as well. And so I really welcome the opportunity to discuss this. I think that as an industry, we can work much better together to realize the benefits through the collaboration and standardization. So I'm looking at my time. I have a few minutes. If we look at the context, and this was mentioned today, so I won't give the numbers again, but 90% of goods move around the world on ships. So it is a huge industry. We're talking about roughly 11 billion tons of goods, if I'm not mistaken. And it's a complex industry, paper heavy, as was mentioned before, and often only as strong as the weakest link in the supply chain. And of course, the unfortunate pandemic has not only exacerbated the need to work together and collaborate to improve our efficiencies, but as David mentioned, it's also moved digitalization many years forward, which is probably a good thing. Of course, to complicate things, ports, vessels are exposed to, all sorts of risks, whether it's natural disasters, pandemics, wars, financial crisis, political crisis. So these incidents are very hard to predict. So shipping companies and everyone in the supply chain has to be able to adapt to these situations, act fast, and keep each other and stakeholders up to date. So real-time communication is much more crucial. And I think it was mentioned earlier on with the wooden boats, that cannot continue. Briefly touching on standards, as you know, I'm also chair of the Digital Container Shipping Association, which was created in 2019 by the carriers as a neutral nonprofit association. And the goal there was to establish open source digital standards for the container shipping industry, but not only, to ensure interoperability. And again, to what David was saying, to ensure we speak the same language, because exchanging only one source of data from export to import does require that standardization. Now, if we look at the way the world is interconnected and the way the supply chains are integrated, it doesn't make much sense to develop new tech without embracing and adopting digital standards. So I think this is a key element in the discussion. Finally, on the role of the government officials, which was again mentioned earlier on, if we look only at my favorite document, which is the Bill of Lading, still the single most important document in international trade, that limit of the printed Bill of Lading became really apparent at the start of the COVID-19, when cargo in ports simply couldn't be released because the paper documents were stuck elsewhere. As we didn't have, some borders were closed, we had a lot of air freight delays. So that's largely why we launched the MSC e-Bill of Lading, with the key benefits of speed, security, and of course, cost. So if we can, the more we can move, let's say, these kind of documents to digital, I think we will be much more successful. But we do need the key stakeholders to be aligned, and this is where banks, governments must speed efforts, and that's my call to action for today. And I know things are happening also on the regulatory front towards accepting and adopting digital documentation. I think that would be certainly a very, very good way forward. And of course, being able to make that an integral part of international trade agreements, I think would really help this industry tremendously. So that are my words for today. I think I was actually under the 10 minutes. So thank you.
And thank you. Just so we can get to some of these questions. I'd be remiss, I am a journalist first and foremost, and I do write a column for American Shipper. And today I spoke with UNCTAD, and they gave me the ability to break some news here for us. I would like to start with, if the UNCTAD team can show the shipment delays from China to the European ports. As I mentioned earlier, I view trade, and I try to make it as domestic as possible. It's a flow of, it's a series of pipes. And what you are looking at now is the next impending crisis that we are going to see within the world of trade in maritime. Because of the lockdowns in China, we've all seen the stoppage, if you will, right, of the containers, the misplacements, et cetera. Because of the blank sailings and because of the congestion, and we have seen, other congestions piling up, I have been speaking with logistics folks within Germany, and a lot of them are very concerned about the availability of empty containers from Europe to North America East Coast. This is something that we're going to see in the next month or two. As we all know, trade is a forward-looking indicator of a country's economy, as well as the state of play. And what you're seeing here is because of the delays of shipments from China to the US, this is actually impacting the flow of trade within Europe, which will then have the trickle-down effect from Europe to the United States and Canada and Mexico. As a result, if we could please move then to the next slide that I had, Project 44, flow into. This is Europe to the East Coast. Again, the flow of trade. This is what you're seeing right now. And this is why I love the bills of lading, Import Genius, all this data. If you're able to connect all of this data, you can see the trends. And this, as of right now, from Europe to the East Coast, when you're looking at the days of moor, the days that these vessels are moored, you are seeing the delay in its as it's happening. And then finally, I wanted to show the next state of play of what we are looking at. And for those that are in here, Ningbo. I have this great chart here to show you the vessels at anchorage. In the flow of trade, trade has to move. And so what happens is, when it comes to Shanghai, you're going to move away from Shanghai. So what is the next best port to go to get your product in and out? Ningbo. Ningbo, unfortunately, has seen an increase in anchorage. And the reason why is a couple of things. You have lockdowns in areas of Ningbo as we speak. And because of the amount of TEUs coming in and the lack of people working within the port, yes, it is open, but you and I both know it takes people to move trade. If trucks are not able to freely move, you have this slowdown. This, my friends here, is what we're going to be looking at next in terms of the next big congestion. And so I thank UNCTAD to give me this ability. And I actually have a new column really drilling down on this, speaking to folks within the logistics communities in Germany and abroad looking at this. And this is the reason why I wanted to kind of show the heat, the immediacy, as we like to say in news. And I want to toss out the first question to Mona. We've heard the call, time and time again within this last hour about the need for transparency, the need to have a digital platform, if you will, where everybody can kind of communicate with each other and see. I can tell you first and foremost here in the United States that US Customs does not speak to the ports. I broke a story where the ad hoc vessels were coming in. US Customs knew, but the Port of LA and Long Beach did not know until literally 48 hours before they were coming in. Realistically, it's great to talk about the need for transparency, but we need data sharing. We need trust. How, from your perspective, how do we encourage the world to get together when within each country, we all have our own problems, right, as it relates to the communications between ports and customs?
Thank you very much, Lori, and clearly a very pertinent question. So transparency is very important because you want to ship your goods, and you are subjected to so many regulations and licenses and things like that. And quite often you don't know really what you're subjected to. We have tried to put in place single windows so that the shipper or the customer goes to just one place that can guide them as to what the regulations are. But then often these single windows end up being many single windows, and they don't necessarily work well every time. So how they are designed is very important. And another thing that we have been doing, which has been helpful, is to put in place trade information portals where to ship a particular product, all the regulations across all ministries are transparently put in that portal. And the added value is not only that you have the information there, but that if the information is not there, then you are not subject to it, basically. So that gives incentive for ministries to be very clear about what is needed to ship your products from point A to point B, and also to cross customs and all the regulatory issues around customs. And this is not just customs and ports. It's also sometimes Ministry of Agriculture and other ministries that have regulations that affect your shipment and delay the shipment. And if we don't know what these regulations are, or if they are implemented in an ad hoc manner, all this will decrease transparency and increase the cost and increase the delays. So using actually the subject of today, using really digital platforms to be very transparent about these rules and regulations and licensing requirements can go a long way. Thank you, Lori.
Sure thing. You know, when it comes to globally connected customs and the costs and all of that, where are we? What I would like to toss out to is to Nasri. Where, from your perspective, how would you grade the connectivity of the world, and how, from an efficiency standpoint, we can raise the level, so to speak? Nasri? Can you unmute, please?
Is that in terms of custom clearance?
Customs clearance, what, from your perspective, what are some suggestions that you can see in terms of the facilitation of trade with customs, with connectivity and better communication with amongst the countries?
Okay, Laurie, thanks again for this question. I like to take this in the perspective of the reports that are going to be published out by the World Bank, the Logistic Performance Index. It's been delayed for 4 years now. I'm just like everyone else, we are anxiously waiting for the reports to be out. And to be really honest, what I see, we have a little bit of issues here in this part of the world, meaning to say the Asian part, because there seems to be lacking in transparency of documentation. The documentation flow is not there. It's still being physically transferred. You remember the case that I showed you just now about the wooden boats? The wooden boat has been there for many years. For traditionally, the document has to be exchanged by hands, and only recently we have managed to change that. And we cannot move forward, or we always move backwards when we don't have any. E-commerce thing to search off. I give another example. In the case of in the case of maritime industry middleman, we talk about maritime industry middleman. The first to be hardest is the one that who don't want to change, to succumb to changes. For instance, the old school of freight forwarders who took books by fax and phone will be hit hardest. They will be first to be out of business, because they will not be the whatsoever of Amazon's or Alibaba.com or most integrated supply chain. So because when you have a button, when everybody wants to have, you push a button and it goes to see everything. Okay, coming back to your question, what will the customs do? I would like to see some kind of transparency. bill of lading would be nice to facilitate faster clearance, pre-clearance of the cargo. I've seen that in Singapore. Singapore is doing that also. They have pre-clearance of cargo. They need the documents later. It needs to be scanned, not to be manually being handed. And actually, that's what the one that's been doing in Singapore. I mean, yeah, the container clearance is only 3 minutes at PSA. It's paperless, and full scanning is been established now, and custom clearance comes later. Right, I think back to you there.
Thank you so much. That was great. You know, when we're talking about digital bill of lading, you know, one of the things I follow is the flow of trade, especially with energy, you know, in the world that we are living in right now with what's going on with Russia and Ukraine. I was really surprised when I was talking to my energy traders that, you know, there are digital bills of lading for energy imports for the United States to track, yet the exports are still paper. And that is the reason why it takes at least 2 months to go through the data. It really is astounding in the world that we're living in, that we're still dealing with paper at this time. Stephen, I want to go to you because, you know, we spoke prior and, you know, we kind of joked around, and it's really true, doesn't matter where you live. You know, people think, you know, you go on the computer, you just click on it, and then magically, you know, the doohickey that you bought on the screen is here. In terms of implementing digitalization, you know, is there a lack of standing? Like, what is the biggest lack of understanding when it comes to when it comes to the flow of trade, if you will, with digitalization and the arrival of product?
Thanks, Laurie. Yeah, I don't really call it an understand, but I think one of the biggest challenges is certainly still around border processes. Around customer management. What we often see is, particularly if you're a border agency, there's an assumption that if you digitalize things, if you automate them, it means job losses and it means a loss of control. Actually, it doesn't. You know, I think, Adrian, I think you mentioned earlier on about, you know, have your finite resources. What it means for someone like Adrian in his position, if you move into automation, risk-based approach to controls, what it means is you can target the resources that you have at the area of greatest risk. And this is something that I was previously involved in the British administration. I actually managed compliance strategy. So this is a key area. So one of the things that needs to be discussed and needs to be proven as well is the win-win position for that. As I mentioned earlier on, the transparency of e-commerce, because it leaves this digital footprint wherever it's all there, and that is a challenge overall. The key to overcoming that is public-private dialogue. You know, the TFA talks about national trade facilitation committees. You need the public sector and you need the private sector in the room. The private sector needs to understand the challenges that a customs administration like Zimbabwe faces in terms of managing and assuring revenue collection, managing and assuring safety and security. And at the same time, the other challenge is, of course, when I mentioned when you come from a command and control issue, and this was a challenge that I saw previously, was the need to facilitate legitimate trade. And of course, you have things like authorized economic operator processes. So I think that's one of the things, is moving away from paper to digital and really showing the benefits for all of moving to that. And I think the key one is busting this myth that automation means job losses, particularly in border agencies. It doesn't. It means putting your resources really where you get the biggest bang for your buck. And of course, it facilitates trade. And I want to pick up on one example. We worked with Montenegro. In fact, we presented together with them at the World Customs Organization. And one of the benefits that we saw was not only in the reduction of inspections, the speed of cross-border transactions, but more importantly, the Montenegrin Customs actually reported that compliance went up and revenue went up because of the transparent nature of the data that was finally being transmitted. So I think that's the key thing. And for those of anyone wanted to look at that, it was presented at the WCO, I think, in the PCAR in 2020. It was a joint presentation. So there's another opportunity as well. So showing a win-win, I think, is key. Thanks.
Thanks, Stephen. And let's go to Adrian. You know, it's interesting where, you know, we talk about digitalization and job loss. Here in the US, I'm sure you guys are reading, we have the ILWU negotiations going on right now. And the big pitfall over there is having automation. So it's, you know, this whole thing of jobs and, you know, fears and things of that, it really kind of transcends from the physicality, if you will, to digital. Adrian, you know, realistically, when it comes to having the digital bill of lading, you know, the government has to be on board. There's so many different layers. There's bureaucracy. Things move very slow. Realistically, from your perspective, how long do you think something like this can take?
Thank you very much, Laurie, for that question. You know, the issue of bills of lading, I think from the previous speakers, traditionally, this is a document that has changed hands across borders, across continents, and administrations have always requested for certain copies of the bills of lading as they conduct the clearance process. But I think if I talk from a Zimbabwean perspective, we also had to change our requirements in view of the COVID-19 pandemic to allow for photocopies of such documents to be utilized, or, you know, and so that we don't really call for a specific copy of the bill of lading. So it's quite a transitional process, but it's really the utilization of an e-bill of lading is really dependent on the implementation of digitalization techniques where we utilize electronic documents in order for us to conduct our clearance processes. I think the pandemic has really taught us that physical documents or physical movement of documents is not required. And as an administration, we have adapted. We are now fully relying on the lodgement of electronic documents, the processing of electronic documents. But in terms of the time period, as you've indicated, this is where we have a challenge, because we have a number of other stakeholders operating within the border environments or the port environments, other government agencies, other government entities, and their level of automation or their level of digitalization may not be at the level of customs administrations or other administrations. So you find this is where we have a challenge. And this is why, to combat that, as Zimbabwe, we have prioritized the implementation of our single window, which is expected the first stage to be implemented by end of June. And the full first phase implementation is expected to be implemented by 2023. So from a Zimbabwean perspective, we are on track in going that route, and we would certainly welcome the utilization of an bill of lading. So really from a Zimbabwean context, looking at the progression from our current state to the state where we implement our single window platform, we would look at probably 2 to 3 years to get there. But like I'm saying, we're a developing country. Other countries more developed or who have more resources can obviously look at reducing that timeline. Thank you, Laurie.
Thank you. And, and we see, across the world, public-private partnerships are really needed. You just can't rely on one thing. You really need to have both. And that leads me to Andre. When it comes to partnerships, policy is so key, right? When it comes to the implementation and the execution. What are some pitfalls, from your experience that need to be avoided as we embark on this public-private or, partnership in terms of adoption and innovation? Andre?
No, thanks, Laurie. That's a tough question. Um, I was thinking about what you mentioned earlier on the digital platforms, which of course is digital platforms for all. I mean, what we're seeing from my perspective is that there have been, and there are a couple of initiatives that governments have launched in the US. As you know, there are several initiatives like Flow and the FMC initiative, which is still slightly separate, and of course the CBP data sharing, which seems to remain in that bubble. So already there you see that bringing in private sector as we were part of the initiative is a very good thing, because it allows us to make sure that it's shaped towards reality, and not just towards the administration. I can talk to you about this privately for a long time, but I think what we see is the way that we serve customs authorities, for example, in each country, and within each country and each port is very often different. So you already have the fact that having all these different data flows with the same information in different formats, there's already a huge loss of the quality of the information. And I think quality of data is much more important than just data, and I'm sure Stephen will agree. And I mean, it is feasible, because we've seen, I mean, Air does it, Global Express. I spoke to them recently in Geneva, and they do it. So we're semi-digital, but I think that, yeah, working together with authorities to get to that point, using existing standards, if they exist, rather than going and inventing something new, where every time we lose data quality, is the key. And lastly, change management mindset. Stephen, yeah, you said that's the biggest inhibitor today.
Yeah, honestly, that's like the biggest nomad of Drano, as I like to say. Drano, for folks out there that don't know, it helps unclog the pipes.
Yeah.
It's like breaking that, that closed-minded box. Like, people need to get out of the box, so to speak. And I know we love the box because it's the container, but we need to bust open that box in order to really, get digitalization going across the level, because there really is a digital divide. We've gotten some really great questions from our audience, and a lot of them are all about this, the e-bill of lading. I'm going to send this over to Stephen. I'm going to send over two questions, if you will. The first one is DHL concerned about the bill of lading? Does that cut in on profitability? I already know what you're going to say, but I'll leave you to talk about efficiencies and how, digitalization is a good thing. And then also too, in terms of blockchain-based contracts replacing paper, does it totally eliminate it? And if so, what would it take for countries, especially the developing countries and those that are in the infancy, to embrace blockchain-based contracts for logistics when they're just starting out? I know I threw a lot at you, but Stephen, you can go for it.
Thanks. Yeah, the first one, e-bill, it's not an area that I get involved in. As you can imagine, we have 600,000 employees, just to give you an example of the size of DHL. In fact, I think it's more than that now. So so e-bill is not something that really can. So the policy around e-bill, digitalization, we've completely embraced. One thing I do want to talk about though is Express, because I think the question was it Express? Express has diversified so much that documents are incredibly important for our customers, and we are still moving important documents across the world, at breakneck speed to arrive in offices in New York, for example, from Asia at the opening hours of finance institutions, and of course documents around other integral essential industries. But we have diversified enormously. DHL Express is heavily involved in e-commerce. We're heavily involved in very complex industries such as pharmaceuticals. So obviously it's a debate. I can't give you a clear answer on the e-way bill, but one thing I can say is the DHL Express has evolved so much from 1969, when Dulcie, Hillblom and Lind were carrying documents to Hawaii. So it's it's a fast moving industry. the other one on blockchain around contracts. I think it's clear in the world that we're in, even where I live in Germany, we live with, paper-based contracts. But so, there is going to be a need for paper-based documents for, I don't know how long, that's dependent on regulators, etc. But the one thing I can say is that blockchain does one thing, and this is one of the great advantages of blockchain. It gives you so much transparency. And of course, the neutral nature of the way a blockchain operates, and the ability for individuals within a supply chain to populate that blockchain independently of the other parties is its key advantage. So, blockchain is evolving. We are working at the moment, as I mentioned, with customs administrations. We already have a blockchain running with customs in Dubai, and we're working together with some of our donor partners on looking at blockchain in other countries as well. So yeah, it's the future. It's something that we're committed to, and it's something that we definitely within Go Trade and within the company itself are looking to pilot more and more.
Well, thank you so much. This 90 minutes went way too fast. I don't know about you. I have so many questions that I was going to ask all of you, and now you're all lucky because now I've got to wrap this up. It's really been an insightful time here, and we all know things take time to implement, but we have to start the discussion, right? We have to think out of the box. We have to really, kind of be innovative. And it is my honor right now to introduce Samika Sarman, the Director of the Division of Technology and Logistics of the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development. Shamika, can you unmute yourself?
Hi, Lori, can you hear me?
I can hear you, and you're somewhere in there. Can you wave?
I don't know that you can see me, but at least you can hear me. So I think let me wrap up because I don't want to take too much of your time. You see, I think this is an extremely important discussion because you see, in spite of all the the commerce still needs to be moved physically. And, we have been doing e-trade readiness assessments in countries, developing countries. We have done like 30 of them so far. And our experience is that logistics is a very big hurdle to overcome if countries and especially SMEs want to engage in e-commerce. And the speedy delivery is what we expect when we click and order online. So it makes it even more difficult for them. Speedy, reliable delivery, and logistics is a key enabler in this sense. There are immense potential for SMEs in developing countries to connect directly the producers to consumers and to cut out of all the middlemen, I guess they are mostly men, middlemen of the picture, so that the producers really can capture value. And that's the potential e-commerce brings. I can, for example, I'm from Sri Lanka. I would love to order a tea from a Sri Lankan tea estate. And I lived in Ethiopia. I love to order coffee directly from Ethiopian farmers. And that is what this technology enables. But it is immense difficulty for developing countries because the logistics comes as a major barrier to engage in e-commerce and cross-border. So let me give you a couple of numbers. I think you must have seen these numbers that we issued. Online retail sales increased substantially from around $2 trillion in 2019 to 2021. It has become almost $3 trillion. So this is like a doubling during this COVID-19 pandemic. But this number is probably even an underestimation because this is only for countries for which data is available, about, representing about half the global GDP. So this is a gross underestimation. So the number is 2 trillion online retail sales in 2019. Now it is almost 4 trillion in 2021. And this trend is going to continue. And this trend is going to continue real fast. But the cross-border B2C, the aspect component is only about 9 to 10%. So a lot of e-commerce is taking place within the country. It's developing countries and developed countries, mostly developing countries. We order things and in the town, somebody delivers to us in a motorcycle, and then we pay cash on delivery. But this will not let developing countries to engage in very lucrative cross-border e-commerce. So the logistic is immense. So the conversations that you're having here is extremely important. So let me also tell you, since I'm closing and I want to put a bit of a marketing for my own organization, UNCTAD, we are helping countries with practical solutions. For example, we have an ASICUDA program. This is a customs automation single window program. And we are developing with countries e-payments, e-docs, single window solutions. And we are also working with UPU to automate post offices. This is also another barrier. There are tsunami of small parcels coming through post offices, and post offices don't know what to do. They're not automated. They don't have the risk assessment systems. And then we have trade facilitation solutions, and we are also working with seaports to make the ports resilient, not just to e-commerce, but also to all kinds of crises coming their way. But what we see is just a drop in the ocean. So we really need to connect the dots. So this is why I'm so happy. We have the countries representing Zimbabwe, we have Mona representing the World Bank, and Stephen, the DHL, and others that, this esteemed panel. And I'm sure you had a great discussion, but let me tell you that this is extremely important to connect the dots in the area of logistics. There is an enormous amount of work to be done if we really want to help developing countries to realize the true potential of cross-border trade in e-commerce. So having said that, Lorianne, and thank you so much. And can I also thank you for the excellent moderation and getting everybody to talk and creating enormous amount of conversation around this issue. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much. And you hit on so many wonderful points. And what I love about trade is that we have seen through the decades and through the hundreds of years, good trade lifts up countries. You've seen that the establishment and the creation of the middle class in developing countries because of trade. And what we need now is, we don't need rhetoric, and we all hear the rhetoric, right? Doesn't matter what country you're in, you need the action. And ports are more than just vessels coming in. It's the back end, it's the truck, it's the rail, it's the warehouse. There are so many components within trade, within the environment. Everybody, like especially here in the United States, one of the biggest problems that we see is that every port is a bubble. The bubble needs to be popped so everybody can be connected, so you can have that facilitation of trade and you can have that communication. And the faster that trade moves, the better, because like I said, a vessel and a container at rest does not make money. And for the world and for the developing countries to no longer be developing, you need the trade to be moving. And so I really hope that this discussion that we had, and I really loved Andre's comments about when we make these trade pacts, throw in digitalization, throw in something like that onus, not just a memorandum of understanding. Let's get it done. We have until 7:10, or that's East Coast time, so sorry guys. We have about 9 minutes left. And I would love to, I'm gonna go to everybody very quickly, please. If you can summarize your thoughts on today. And again, thank you so much. You guys are all amazing. Amona, I give you the mic. And if briefly you can sum up your thoughts.
Thank you very much, Lori. Well, very quickly, I want to thank everyone.
As agreed, the interpreters unfortunately have to leave at this point.
From international organizations like UNCTAD, the World Bank, but also from customs officials and the private sector that is actually doing the logistics. And I learned a lot myself. And I want to reiterate something Shamika mentioned, which is how important it is for all of us to collaborate, both international organizations, governments, and private sector, because we will probably need all of us to make things easier on the logistics side. So this kind of collaboration is very important. Thank you, Lori.
Thank you. Stephen, I would give the mic to you.
Thank you, Laurie. Yeah, I want to echo what Sharika said, and also from Mona. The key thing is for me is the fact that it is about public-private dialogues. One of the things that we do need to embrace, and Sharika, you just mentioned it, was the lucrative opportunities that cross-border e-commerce represents, and this is where we go trade. So, digitalization is here. It's been an absolute savior during the pandemic. It's been a challenge. It still is a challenge. But if we work together in the public and private sector, we can come up with the solutions together. So that's it for me. Change management is a key, but it's here to stay. Let's collaborate and let's really optimize this, particularly in DCs and LDCs. Thanks.
Thank you. Nasri?
Okay, all right. To wrap up, I just want to throw three ideas. E-commerce and the port. Again, I have to talk about the port. I'd like to see more of the port to transform the operation from being purely volume-based to value-added services. That's one. And secondly, can you imagine that if the port's able to transform from the logistics norms towards the geo-logistics norms? That's secondly, and last but not least, for the ports to transform the operation from being regional to become a regional e-fulfillment center. That would be beautiful. They will solve a lot of things. Back to you. And nice to be here. Glad to be with all. Yeah.
Thank you so much. You had such thoughtful comments today. Adrian, I give you the microphone now.
Thank you, Laurie, and I'm also quite grateful to be part of this panel. We've certainly had very, very good discussions. But I think my last or parting words would be to say that for e-commerce or e-trade to flourish, and for us to ensure trade facilitation, it's the responsibility of everyone involved in the supply chain. And here we're looking at private sector, public sector, as well as the international organizations out there. I loved what you said about the bubble. We need to burst all those bubbles that are floating around and create one big bubble where we all pull hands together and work together and ensure that this is all a success. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I'll give you the pin to start popping the bubbles. And Andre, final word.
Pop the bubbles, pop the bubbles. Well, I learned a lot today from this superb panel. I must say it was really very, very interesting. Apologies to Stephen that I called David a couple of times. I don't know why. Maybe it's another famous name. The last thing I wanted to say, if I may, is that there's a lot of criticism around the ocean carriers for the supply chain congestion. But I think that with this conversation, it's pretty clear that we are working very hard to alleviate the problems that mostly lie ashore, as we said today. So, unlocking the potential of digital tech, data sharing altogether is really a key initiative. And in the end, I think everyone said it, it's pretty obvious that we are much stronger together.
We definitely are. And, on another note too about the carriers, the carriers also are being very proactive in between air and warehousing and trucking, really expanding their trade, their trade, controlling the flow of trade to make sure you can manage it properly. I would like to thank everybody for taking the time today to join us. And I hope that this sparks a discussion. Hope you guys all noodle on it, as I like to say, and hopefully these bubbles can be popped and the world can become one. So the flow of trade and the whole world can be lifted as a result of trade efficiency. Thank you, everybody.